Hey, what's going on, guys? So, I remember a while back, probably around that DC Rebirth era, there were rumors that Milestone was going to come back, and these weren't insubstantial rumors either. This was coming from guys like Reginald Hudlin, Dennis Cohen, and some other long-time reputable comic book veterans, which I was excited for because at the time, a lot of the Milestone characters were part of the DC Universe proper after the New 52, and it was bad. Like, really bad. So, ironically, I felt like resegregating the Milestone characters back to their own universe was the right move. And then a few years later, at one of the DC fandom events, Milestone Returns was officially announced, and then after that, we got that Milestone Returns one-shot, and I was not feeling it, particularly surrounding everything with Static and the Big Bang. Now, for those of you who don't know, if you haven't read the original Milestone Static comics, or even that really crappy 8-issue New 52 comic, or if you haven't watched the Static Shock TV series, or if you have but it's been a while, Virgil Hawkins was this nerdy kid with kind of a Quirk Chungus type personality, and he's getting bullied at school. And one day, his friend Larry, who's in a gang, gives him a gun to deal with one of his bullies. And at first, Virgil follows through. He hears about how there's going to be this big gang meetup, and his bully Francis will be there. So Virgil goes to the harbor. He sees Francis, has him in his sights, and then he throws the gun away at the last second because that's not the man he wants to be. But regardless of Virgil making the right choice in that moment, he's still in the wrong place at the wrong time. The cops show up, bullets start flying, and there's an experimental nerve gas that goes off, mutating everyone in the area, including Virgil. And this event would go on to be known as the Big Bang, and that's where you get Bang Babies, which are the Milestone equivalent of mutants and metahumans. And there have been some variations on this origin between the original Milestone series, the New 52, and the animated series, which changed a few details here and there to streamline the character's mythology. But for the most part, this is how Static's origin plays out. And I feel very strongly about this. I think Static might have one of the best comic book superhero origins, period. Like, for me, it's up there with Bruce Wayne watching his parents get murdered, and Peter Parker catching a case of instant karma with the death of Uncle Ben. It's powerful, and it tells you everything you need to know about that character and who they are given their actions after they come out of it on the other side. So, changing the Big Bang from being a gang meetup gone wrong to a Black Lives Matter protest gone wrong, where Virgil, from the jump, is well-intentioned, he's socially conscious, and has a desire to help those around him in his community, kind of fundamentally changes the core thesis of the character of Virgil Hawkins. It's kind of like if you change Spider-Man's origin to where Uncle Ben dies of a heart attack and Peter can't dial 911 because he prioritized charging his Nintendo Switch over charging his phone, or having Thomas and Martha Wayne die in a car accident. Like, if one of those two examples just sounds weird and wrong, that's exactly how I felt about changing Static's origin. And I've seen a lot of people, including the current Static artist Nicholas Draper Ivey, say, oh, well, we had to change the origin to reflect the modern day. And I don't want to give him too much crap, or writer Vita Ayala too much crap for that decision. I know that this was an editorial choice, and I know that this was just out of their hands, but, okay. I don't know how much you guys know about U.S. history, but a lot of the societal woes that Dwayne McDuffie and Robert L. Washington III and John Paul Leon and Dennis Cohen and all those other Milestone creators were commenting on back in the 1990s are the same exact problems that we're facing today. I know that advancements in technology and the rise of social media makes the social political landscape feel radically different, but it's kind of like what I was talking about in my Golden Age Superman video comparing 1930s America to the modern day. And really, if you just take a step back, you see very clearly in full-on 4K HD how the more things change, the more they stay the same. That's why I feel like Static's origin needed to be modernized, and about as much as Peter Parker's origin needs to be modernized, or Bruce Wayne's origin needs to be modernized. That said, I know that the original Milestone Big Bang was inspired by real-world events with the 1985 Philadelphia MOVE bombing. Again, anyone not familiar with U.S. history, MOVE was a black nationalist organization that was centered in this tenement complex as their main HQ, and the Philadelphia Police Department bombed the absolute fuck out of it, killing 11 MOVE members, but mostly injuring and killing a bunch of innocent men, women, and children because so that inspiration grounded the original Milestone universe in its time. So I get the attempt at trying to do the same with connecting the 21st century Big Bang to Black Lives Matter protest, but I feel like there was a way to do that where you didn't rob Virgil of his agency. Because you need the gun. You need to give Virgil a false sense of power, which he intends to use selfishly and maliciously, so that when he actively chooses against it, he's karmically rewarded with real power, which he uses selflessly and heroically. Because without that decision being made, you just fundamentally change the character. So for a while, that was kind of the key reason why I chose to just ignore the new Milestone universe and the new Static book. That said, I love the character, and given the way Milestone is run nowadays, with this whole 1 6-issue miniseries every year and a half to 2 years kind of a model, similar to DC's Earth 1 initiative, I think it's safe to say that, at least for the foreseeable future, this will be the one and only Static that we will be getting. So I decided to give the new Static an honest shot on its own terms.
The name's Static. I put a shock to your system.
Now, with any reboot or remake or adaptation, especially in comics, there's always going to be this Ship of Theseus question. You know, how much do you change from the original source material before ultimately winding up with something unrecognizable that feels like something wholly original that's essentially just wearing the skin of what came before it and is basically that thing in name only? And that's a question that was running through my mind the entire time I was reading the new Static. Because while yes, the protagonist here is a black teenager named Virgil Hawkins who gets electricity powers and becomes a superhero, beyond that superficial base pitch for the character, there is nothing that links this new Milestone Static to any of the previous iterations of the character. Here, instead of Virgil being a nerdy, goofy class clown who becomes a superhero because he's a comic book fanboy, and what else are you going to do if you end up with superpowers? Here, Virgil is an angsty, angry, socially minded black youth with a chip on his shoulder about the state of the world. Like, he's basically Huey Freeman from the Boondocks, and he becomes a superhero to rescue other Bang Babies who've been kidnapped by ICE and taken to a government black site. I mean, it's not ICE, but it's basically ICE, so I'm just going to call it ICE in the video. Which isn't a bad idea for a superhero comic. It's just not Static. You know, like... Which isn't to say that the original Milestone series, or even the animated series, didn't handle topics like institutional racism, social prejudice, the prison-industrial complex, the over-policing of minority communities, and stuff like that. Like, they definitely did, but it was always focused through the lens of a coming-of-age story. Because Static, much like early Spider-Man, is a coming-of-age story. It's a superhero high school teen drama, and this isn't that. Like, at all. And I don't think that was the kind of story that writer Vita Ayala was interested in telling. Which sort of begs the question, why even write Static at that point? Which is weird, because I've seen a lot of other comic book YouTubers and, you know, people who talk about comics on TikTok and Twitter talk about how Static Season 1 and Shadows of Dakota take cues from the Static Shock TV show, and how, you know, the new Static comics are a spiritual successor to the original Static comics. And I guess my question to them is,
with all due respect, what the fuck are you talking about?
Alright, listen. I'm not going to give the new Static book too much crap for not resembling the original Milestone comic book series, mainly because, despite really liking those comics, aside from me and maybe 10 other people, I don't think anyone under 45 has read any of that material. Primarily because DC has done such an absolute dog water job of keeping any of those comics in print, so for that reason, the Static TV show kind of just is anybody and everybody's core frame of reference for the character. And despite the show reinventing a lot of the character's mythology for the simple sake of making this character palatable for 7-year-olds to watch on Saturday mornings, I think the show did a pretty decent job of translating Static to screen. And with Static Season 1 and subsequently Shadows of Dakota, you do see the influence of the Static Shock TV show here. Like, you know, the Bang Baby, Gestapo, Suicide Squad that works for ICE, all of those guys are the villains from Ebon's crew. And of course, Ebon was the main antagonist of the show, and he winds up being the main antagonist of Shadows of Dakota. Which, by the way, a little funny. Because in the show, Ebon is basically a stand-in for a gang leader named Holocaust. But again, because the show is aimed at 7-year-olds, you couldn't have a character named Holocaust walking around in your show. But Holocaust is in the new Milestone universe, so having both of those characters occupy the same space is just a little funny to me. But I was kind of glad to see him show up here, even though he's nothing like he is in the show. As for some other things I liked, however, I like that Virgil rides a skateboard. You know, it's a small touch, but I feel like making Virgil a skater is a really inspired choice, given his iconic mode of transportation. A lot of the character designs by artist Nicholas Draper Ivey are heavily inspired by the show. In fact, I like how he found a nice middle ground between classic Milestone Static and the iconic black and gold design for the animated series. I thought that was cool. I did find it a little off-putting how the classic Static costume is basically an Iron Boy Jr. style tech suit designed by Hardware, who, for those of you who don't know, is for all intents and purposes Milestone's Iron Man. So you just know that triggered the absolute fuck out of me while reading this.
God damn it! Same shit, different day!
But really, Nicholas Draper Ivey's art overall I thought was really fun to look at. He's got a really dynamic eye for action, and his art often gets compared to shonen manga, and I 100% see the vision, and I think it works really well for a character like Static, because it's youthful and kinetic, and even in quiet moments, there's a dynamism to it that just scratches your eyeballs in the best way possible. I just wish that it was backed up by a narrative that matched Draper Ivey's energy. And look, I don't want to come off like one of those, yeah, new stuff is bad, make everything new like the old stuff, because the old stuff is better. Like, I feel like that's how I'm coming off in this video, and that's not my intention. It's more so, this feels like a reinvention of Static, based on a reinvention of Static, told by a writer who seemingly has no interest in Static. And that winds up being my problem with this new Static series. Because the story about rising up against fascism and building community and the government rounding up and weaponizing minorities to hunt down other minorities and the US government experimenting on black people, specifically black and brown children, you can tell that story and address those real world issues while also being true to the original spirit of Static and being a high school teen drama coming of age story about Virgil Hawkins and maintaining his quirky, goofy personality and attitude. Like, the baby didn't have to get thrown out with the bathwater in reinventing this mythology, I don't think. Even with the weird narrative limitation that Milestone is working under, where they can only publish a 6-issue miniseries every 2 decades. Because if you look at something like the first 2 arcs of Bendis and Bagley's Ultimate Spider-Man, for comparison, that is very much a reinvention of Spider-Man's entire mythology through the lens of a movie pitch, which, you know, that's basically just what comics are these days, and that sort of just is what it is. But despite all of that book's reinvention of Spider-Man, given, again, the first 2 arcs, Peter Parker is still a science nerd who gets bullied. He ends up getting bitten by a spider in a lab that gives him superpowers, and his immediate go-to is to get rich off those powers, but then that backfires on him when his Uncle Ben gets shot by the same guy that he let go because, LOL, fuck the police, I'm looking out for me. And then you have the Green Goblin and the whole Osborn family drama on top of that, And then you get to the second arc, which is all about the Kingpin and organized crime and how the mob is using mutated superhumans as enforcers, and that is how Bendis and Bagley reinvent the supervillains in Spider-Man's mythos. And then you get that last issue with Peter and MJ, and it's just them talking and connecting. And in those 13 issues, you get a top-down reinvention of Spider-Man's entire mythology that modernizes the character for the 21st century, while also managing to fundamentally feel like Spider-Man. In fact, a lot of people at the time said that it was the most Spider-Man book on the shelves. And I just think that would have been really cool to see with Static. But, again, I think at the end of the day, they just chose the wrong writer for this project. Because none of the stuff that makes Static static are here. And this isn't me trying to trash Vita Ayala or anything. In fact, that's the last thing I want to do. I know for a fact, and it's very unfortunate, that she's become sort of like the whipping child for a lot of these anti-SJW YouTube grifters over the past couple of years. So I'm not trying to add to that dog pile, but at the same time, personally, I think that they were just the absolute wrong person for this, because they just straight up missed the entire point of the character of Static. You know, like the relationship dynamic between Virgil and Frida, or Virgil and Daisy, or Frida and Larry, gone. Rick being Virgil's gay best friend, you know, what does that look like in the modern day? Doesn't come up. Virgil being faced with the conundrum of embracing his powers and taking what he wants from life by force, and that uphill battle of working to be an upstanding black citizen in a white man's world? Not discussed. Virgil being a superhero to escape his real-life problems? Not addressed. Hell, I don't even think Virgil has a secret identity in this. I think everyone just knows that he's Static, but they don't say anything because he's our Spider-Man. I guess. Suffice to say, I did not enjoy this. This was very much not made for me. Be that as it may, from the looks of it, I am in a complete and total minority here. Everyone else who's read the new Milestone Static loves it, and you know what? More power to you. I'm glad you liked it. And even still, despite not connecting with this like a lot of other people seem to have, I'm still glad that I read it. And I'm glad that I gave it a shot. Like I said, I like the art. I think it's really cool. Particularly the design work. You know, I think Nicholas Draper-Ivey is a really talented artist. I do wish, after having seen more of his work, that instead of working digitally, he worked on this traditionally. You know, especially if these things aren't going to be ongoings, but that's just me. And again, there are some really good ideas here. And I'm not sure if there's a multimedia future with Milestone's characters on the horizon, but if there were, I'm sure that this is going to be the material that any director or showrunner would be looking at, and I really do think that it would be cool to see someone try and, you know, blend and weave Vita Ayala's Golden Age Superman take on Static with McDuffie and Robert L. Washington III's 60s era Spider-Man take on the character. You know, that's the original pitch for Static. You know, I think, because I do think that's possible, and I honestly think that would make for some pretty interesting storytelling, but that's just me. But what about you? Have you read the new Static series? Are you interested in reading the new Static series if you haven't? And if you have, what did you think about it? And what do you think about it in comparison to either the original Milestone Static or the Static Shock TV show? Let me know down below in the comment section. Also, if you like this video, hit the like button, share, support the channel. And if you want to see more content like this, all you gotta do is subscribe. I'm the Mystical Green Beanie. Thank you for watching, and as always, until next time, happy reading, guys. Take care. Peace.
Charged up.